Have you ever thought about periodization and thought, why do we follow quite rigid blocks of training? Why do I have a couple of weeks building and then a deload week? And why do I feel like I have to follow that routine? I'm going to talk through some thoughts here. I'm going to grab a coffee and we're going to discuss the concept of more dynamic periodization and why changing things up might be a better way to go. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. So what I thought I'd do is something a little bit different with these videos. I'm going to maybe do this into a series, but what I'm going to do is grab a coffee and sit down and talk about a thing that I'm thinking about in regards to performance, training, sports science, etc. Now, it doesn't mean any of this is necessarily correct. Some of it might be, some of it might not. What I'm going to do is use this as an opportunity to just get some thoughts out there and really start an interesting discussion, hopefully in the comments down below, around what you think about some of these ideas. Because I typically find when I sit down or when I'm at home like I am now and I go and make a coffee, or I'm at the lab and I walk down the cafe and buy one, I find that that's my time where I just think about stuff to do with what I'm doing with work and what I do as a sports scientist. And that's often where I come up with these different ideas and I then go and investigate them. Some of them lead to dead ends and don't really get anywhere. Some of them are great. So what I want to do is bring that into a little bit of a series. Short, sharp, let's grab a coffee, sit down with me, and let's have a chat just about some random ideas to do with sports science and training. So this one, we're going to be talking about, really, I'm going to call it dynamic periodization. And what I mean by dynamic periodization really is changing things up away from the norm. We commonly think of periodization as this process of basically block periodization is the traditional way of looking at it. Of we might have a couple of weeks building and then a deload week, which is fine, particularly for beginner and amateur athletes if you're coming out of an off season. If you've watched any of the rehab vlog, I went through some block periodization as I built back from my stress fracture, trying to get back. I want some consistency in training. I want to see clear, gradually building volume. That is absolutely fine, interspersed with some rest weeks or some deload weeks to allow me to adapt and change and improve. That is fantastic. But for the more intermediate and advanced athlete, and where this sort of comes from is working with some athletes, consulting to a couple of professional athletes as well, particularly triathletes, big training volume, 20 plus hours a week, even for the guys who are sort of 15 plus hours a week at the more amateur level. Is that really applicable to them if they're waiting for a deload week? Is my first thought that comes to mind. Is there's so much training going on, they push, and then we have a deload. Are they maybe missing an opportunity, or are they pushing it out too far before they need that recovery, or the other way? But also, are we missing opportunity to have more adaptation? That's probably the more positive side of things. Like, yes, recovery is important, and we're quite good at pulling things back, I think, generally as an industry, when people are saying they're fatigued. If someone alerts you to the fact that I'm fatigued, I need some time off, I need a bit of a break, or I need a couple of days just a bit easier, we generally pull back pretty okay. But we generally then miss the opportunity to push a bit harder on the other end, and we tend to push in the wrong time. And what I mean by dynamic periodization is really just fluctuating, and again, more so for the intermediate and advanced athlete, fluctuating the training load based on a few more of those factors. So commonly we look at, all right, we want to have a deload every couple of weeks. Okay, that might be okay. But instead of strictly sticking to that, I can only have a deload in 3 weeks' time because that fits the periodization model I've chosen and I'm using. Let's get to halfway through week 3, and if you're reporting you're really fatigued, you need a break, well, let's take the opportunity. But if that only means you only need 2 to 3 days because we're early in the preparation, our chronic training load's a little bit lower than normal, so you're actually recovering maybe a bit quicker because it's less total volume, for example, not always the case, but for example, maybe we only need 2 to 3 days off instead of, or maybe let's say we only need 3 to 4 days off instead of 7. So let's have a three-day deload or a 4-day deload, and then get back into training again a little bit earlier. That gives us more opportunity to get more adaptation in as a result of bringing the stimulus back a bit earlier, but also bringing the stimulus back more appropriate to where we're ready for. And so all that really then means is we're able to get sessions in when the body's actually in need of it, but also we can bring it back the other way. If you're feeling, gee, I'm really fatigued heading into week 3, I've had 2 hard weeks, I probably really need a break now, well, maybe just take that break a little bit earlier and then we can get back into it a little bit later. There's no reason for you to keep training through that 3rd week if you're really fatigued, and especially if we're not going to output really quality sessions. We're kind of losing out anyway. It's going to put us at more susceptibility of things like injury and burnout, etc. if we just keep pushing through excessive amounts of fatigue, particularly that's also more applicable for when the training volume's really high, middle to back end of your preparation leading up for a major event. Some of the ways that we can use this and adjust this is conversations, talking between you and your coach, or from my perspective, me and the athlete, discussing how are you feeling after main hard sessions, looking at, obviously we can look at numbers in terms of how well we're performing, we over or underachieving, etc. But it really does come from how does the athlete feel. That's a major one that often gets missed. We like to talk about heart rate and power, etc. And I love talking about the metrics and the number side of things and refining things. But what we also have to remember is that, and I've learnt this quite a bit over the last little while in particular, is you have to really specifically listen to how your body's feeling through your own training. You're going to be the best judge of how you're responding to that training. Can you push a little bit harder? I've absolutely had sessions in the last month or two where I've gone, I can't really push too much harder this because I'm right on the limit here. And so I'm conserving a little bit, balancing. Obviously the fatigue is there, but also balancing, well, I'm just not fit enough yet because I'm coming back off a long period of time out with injury. But then on the weekend, for example, I had a game where I was like, no, you know what, I'm pushing really hard, but I reckon I can go further. I can push harder. I'm feeling great. And that sort of flowed into training on Thursday night as well. So I'm going through a really good patch at the moment where my body's responded to a lot of that load and we're building back and we're feeling ready to be able to push a little bit harder. So why not take that opportunity? Even though, technically speaking, last week was supposed to be a bit more of a lower training week. It definitely was on the Tuesday, but on Thursday, what it meant was we didn't have as much volume, so I allowed myself to express that through an increased amount of speed than what I'd been getting previously. Obviously not being silly with it, but that sort of pushed it along. So this is where this concept of dynamic really is just fluctuating to what you need. If you feel like you need a little bit more recovery and you need to take a rest, take the rest. Your body's going to be your best judge of that. At the same token, if you feel like you can push, let's push. Consult with your coach or your sports scientist or even consult with yourself to make sure and sort of think about it first before you do it. We don't want to have these reactionary things of, oh, I'll just take a rest, I'll take a rest, because it's easier to then take too much either way. We don't want to be silly with this. We obviously still want to be really smart and strategic, but it's identifying those signs and being really in tune with how your body's feeling is really critical. And that's also coming back to my point on intermediate advanced athlete. That's why I tend to recommend it for them compared to the beginner athlete who might not have as much awareness around that. So it definitely takes a bit to learn and you have to really understand, what does this actually mean? What kind of fatigue am I experiencing from this session? Am I really fatigued right now, but tomorrow morning when I wake up, am I going to feel okay? That might happen from a high intensity interval session. Short, lower volume, but high intensity. You might feel flat initially. Give it 12 or 14 hours and you probably feel ready to go into a zone 2. Or differently, if you went out and did a 5-hour bike with some zone 3 interspersed into there, some threshold work, you're probably going to be pretty cooked. Maybe you do need to wait an extra 24, 48 hours. So fluctuating based on some of these numbers, obviously you can bring the metrics in, HRV, etc. We can get really fancy with it. But really simply, this concept of dynamic periodization I'm throwing around here today is honestly just moving things in accordance to what you feel you need and how hard you feel you can push. And if you've got a really good inkling of when your body needs recovery and when you feel you can take it up a gear and push a little bit harder, it's going to work perfectly. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight in terms of how my mind ticks over, particularly when I take my time out of the day to grab a coffee. That's when these things come to me. So that's what I'm going to try and do every so often when I'm grabbing a coffee. I'm just going to jump on, give you a thought that I'm thinking about at the time when I'm making that coffee. Usually one thing pops into my head, so whatever it is, we'll chat about it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below as always, but I think there's a good starting point to open up the discussion. Have you thought about periodization beyond a couple of weeks building and a deload? I mean, that's very traditional, and I've definitely applied that and I've used it and I still use it and I still apply it to some athletes. But can we think a little bit differently around how we might actually go about building out our preparation and our training? I'll leave that one for you. Like I said, down in the comments, let me know how you're thinking as well on the other side of it. As I mentioned as the caveat at the beginning, this is not right or wrong. This is not how I would do it or what I'm saying you should do, shouldn't do, etc. This is just some thoughts to get you started in that process of thinking a bit differently about your training and sort of going, well, how can we optimize things a little bit better other than just following the same thing that we've always followed for 10, 15, 20 years in the endurance industry. So hopefully you got a little bit out of it. Like I said, comments down below, let me know what you're thinking. As always, continue to support the channel. I really appreciate those who subscribe and like all the videos. It really does help. But I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to finish off this coffee and yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.